The Krillian battle fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm of metal and fury. Admiral Zextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth grow larger on the tactical display. The blue-green world looked peaceful, almost innocent, spinning slowly in the void. His four eyes narrowed with satisfaction as he studied the intelligence report scrolling across his neural interface. Third-rate technology, he muttered, his mandibles clicking with amusement. Their most advanced weapons are crude chemical explosives and primitive projectile firearms. This will be over in solar cycles. The Krillian Empire had conquered 47 worlds in the past decade. Each species had fallen within days of first contact. The humans appeared no different from the others, weak, divided, and technologically backward. Their planet showed no signs of unified planetary defense systems or energy shields. Most of their population centers were clustered along coastlines and river valleys, leaving vast stretches of wilderness untouched. "Sir," Communications Officer Velthi reported, her scaled head turning toward the Admiral. "The human governments are transmitting surrender offers. Multiple factions are competing to negotiate terms." Zextar's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a Krillian grin. "Typical. They turn on each other before we even fire a shot." How refreshingly predictable. The first wave of invasion craft descended through Earth's atmosphere like burning comets. The Krillian military doctrine was simple and effective. Strike major population centers simultaneously, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, and accept the inevitable surrender within 72 hours. It had worked on every world they had encountered. Major Torvak commanded the assault on what the humans called the Amazon Basin. His orders were straightforward: establish a forward operating base and begin resource extraction. The jungle regions showed high concentrations of rare metals and biological compounds that would fetch premium prices in galactic markets. The primitive human settlements scattered throughout the area posed no threat to his mechanized infantry. Readings show minimal human presence, reported his tactical officer as their transport touched down in a cleared area near a major river. Scattered tribes using pre-industrial technology, stone tools and wooden spears. Torvak activated his environmental suit and stepped onto the humid jungle floor. The air was thick and stifling, filled with strange sounds and exotic scents. Massive trees stretched overhead, creating a green canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns. It reminded him of the nature preserves on Krillia, before the great industrial expansion had cleared them for mining operations. "Beautiful," he admitted grudgingly. "Almost too beautiful to strip mine." His troops fanned out in standard formation, their powered armor gleaming through the undergrowth. Advanced sensors swept the jungle, mapping terrain and identifying potential threats. The readings showed abundant wildlife but no signs of organized human resistance. Occasional thermal signatures indicated small groups of primitives fleeing deeper into the forest. Within hours, the Krillians had established their base camp. Prefabricated structures rose from the jungle floor, housing command centers, weapons depots, and research facilities. Automated mining drones began surveying mineral deposits while biological collection teams gathered specimens of local flora and fauna. "Sir," reported Sergeant Kexim, returning from a patrol, "we encountered a human settlement approximately 10 kilometers north. Crude wooden structures, no visible technology. The inhabitants fled when they saw us approaching." Torvak nodded approvingly. "Standard response. Mark the location for future resource collection. Their primitive dwellings will make adequate shelter for work crews." Similar reports came in from Krillian forces across the globe. The humans were reacting exactly as predicted. Their governments squabbled over surrender terms while their primitive populations fled before the superior alien technology. A few military units attempted token resistance, but their conventional weapons barely scratched Krillian armor plating. On the flagship, Admiral Zextar reviewed casualty reports with growing satisfaction. Total Krillian losses after the first day, 0. Human resistance was crumbling faster than on most worlds. The surrender negotiations would likely conclude within 48 hours, well ahead of schedule. "Admiral," reported Intelligence Officer Nixara, "we're detecting unusual communication patterns from the human governments. They appear to be evacuating certain personnel from major cities." "Evacuation?" Zextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Probably their leadership fleeing to remote bunkers. Standard cowardly behavior. It won't matter." Our sensors can track them anywhere on this primitive world. But something felt different about this conquest. The humans weren't just running, they were moving with purpose. Satellite surveillance showed government officials and military personnel disappearing into the very wilderness areas that Krillian forces were avoiding. The vast forests, mountain ranges, and jungle regions that seemed so empty and harmless. "Sir," Velthi announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human leaders. They're requesting a meeting to discuss surrender terms." "Excellent," Zextar replied. "Schedule it for tomorrow. Have them come to our main landing site. Let them see our forces up close before they grovel for mercy." Down in the Amazon, Major Torvak was experiencing his first doubts about the mission. The jungle was unnaturally quiet around their base. His sensors detected thousands of life forms in the surrounding forest, but nothing approached their perimeter. Even the local wildlife seemed to be avoiding them. "It's as if the entire ecosystem knows we don't belong here," muttered his communications specialist, adjusting the antenna array for the 5th time that day. "Atmospheric interference," Torvak replied dismissively. "These primitive worlds always have unusual electromagnetic properties." But privately he was beginning to understand why his species had never developed on a world like this. The Krillian homeworld was mostly desert and rocky plains, harsh but predictable. This jungle was alive in ways that made his warrior instincts uneasy. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound might be a warning. As night fell over the Amazon, the Krillian forces settled into their defensive positions. Automated sentries scanned the perimeter while the main force rested in their armored shelters. The jungle sounds grew louder in the darkness, howls, calls, and rustling movements that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Torvak stood watch in the command center, studying the sensor displays. Everything appeared normal. Their technology was functioning perfectly. The humans showed no signs of organizing any meaningful resistance. So why did he feel like they were being watched? In the deepest parts of the jungle, where no Krillian sensors could penetrate, shadows moved with deadly purpose. The aliens had made their first mistake. They assumed that Earth's wilderness was empty and harmless. They were about to learn that humanity's true strength had never been their cities or their governments. It had always been their ability to disappear into the places where civilization ended and survival began. Captain Sarah Chen had been dead for 6 hours according to official records. The Krillian orbital strike on her forward operating base had been precise and devastating, leaving nothing but a smoking crater where Firebase Alpha once stood. The alien commanders had undoubtedly marked her unit as eliminated. Another small victory in their seemingly effortless conquest of Earth. They were wrong. Chen crouched in the dense undergrowth 2 kilometers from the blast site, watching through high-powered binoculars as Krillian survey teams examined the destruction. Her surviving team members, 12 Special Forces operators from 6 different nations, lay concealed around her in positions that would have been invisible to human eyes, let alone alien sensors designed for conventional warfare. "Count," she whispered into her throat microphone. The transmission encrypted and burst transmitted to avoid detection. 36 hostiles visible, came the reply from Sergeant Martinez, her spotter. "Standard patrol formation." "No air support," Chen smiled grimly. The Krillians were confident, perhaps overconfident. Their intelligence had identified Firebase Alpha as a standard military installation, complete with radar arrays, vehicle depots, and barracks buildings. What their sensors hadn't detected were the underground bunkers, the camouflaged escape tunnels, and the carefully prepared fallback positions scattered throughout the surrounding jungle. The firebase had been bait, a tempting target designed to draw alien attention, while the real assets disappeared into the green hell that the invaders clearly didn't understand. "Ghost lead to all stations," Chen transmitted. "We are go for Operation Mosquito Bite. Remember, hit fast, fade faster. Make them bleed, but don't let them see you." The Krillians had made their second mistake. They assumed that destroying humanity's conventional forces would break their will to fight. They didn't understand that some humans had spent their entire careers learning to fight without conventional support, in places where technology became a liability rather than an advantage. Private Kowalski moved like a shadow through the jungle canopy, 40 feet above the ground. The Polish Special Forces operator had trained in forests across 3 continents, but the Amazon demanded skills that no training could fully prepare you for. Every movement had to be calculated, every handhold tested. The alien sensors below were sophisticated, but they were designed to detect ground-level threats and aerial vehicles. They weren't programmed to scan for humans moving through the trees like three-dimensional ghosts. Below him, a Krillian patrol was examining unusual readings on their instruments. Their translator devices had picked up human communication signals, but the source seemed to be moving randomly through the jungle. The patrol leader, a grizzled warrior with ritual scars covering his mandibles, gestured for his squad to spread out and investigate. "Contact bearing 090, reported the Krillian scanner operator. "Thermal signature suggests single human, approximately 600 meters. Kowalski grinned and activated his thermal decoy, a small device that projected human body heat while he repositioned to a completely different location. The Krillians would chase shadows while he lined up his real target. The alien technology was impressive, but it relied too heavily on sensors and computer analysis. The Krillians had grown dependent on their machines to tell them what was real and what wasn't. Against conventional forces, this approach was devastatingly effective. Against opponents who understood how to fool those same machines, it became a weakness. Staff Sergeant Williams emerged from the river like a predator from prehistory. The former Navy SEAL had been underwater for 37 minutes, breathing through a reed and moving along the muddy bottom toward the Krillian water purification station. His approach had been invisible to their security systems, which were calibrated to detect vehicles and aircraft, not a human who could hold his breath longer than some dolphins. The purification station was a critical target. The Krillians needed vast quantities of clean water for their operations, and their environmental suits weren't designed for extended jungle deployment. Destroying this facility would force them to rely on orbital supply drops, making their logistics more vulnerable and predictable. Williams planted the charges with surgical precision. The explosives were human-manufactured, designed to produce specific electromagnetic signatures that would confuse Krillian damage assessment systems. When the station exploded, their computers would conclude that it had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure rather than sabotage. 3 kilometers away, Lieutenant Yamamoto was proving that patience was humanity's greatest weapon. The Japanese Special Forces operator had been motionless for 4 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His target was a Krillian communication relay that coordinated activities between their scattered jungle outposts. The alien guards changed shifts every 2 hours with mechanical precision. During the changeover, there was a 47-second window when the communication array was unguarded, and the automated defenses ran a diagnostic cycle. Yamamoto had timed this interval 3 times, confirming that the Krillians followed their protocols exactly, without variation. At precisely 13:47 hours local time, he moved. The Krillian technology was sophisticated but inflexible. Their computers followed predetermined patterns that could be observed, analyzed, and exploited. Human Special Forces operators, by contrast, had trained to be unpredictable, to adapt their tactics to changing circumstances, and to exploit any weakness they could find. Back at the main observation post, Captain Chen watched the coordinated strikes unfold across her tactical display. Each team leader checked in with brief status updates. Cactus in position, Viper ready to strike, thunder rolling in. The radio discipline was perfect. Communications kept to absolute minimum to avoid detection. The first explosion lit up the jungle as Williams' charges destroyed the water purification station. The Krillians responded exactly as predicted, sending rapid response teams racing toward the blast site while their command post tried to establish communications with the damaged facility. 12 seconds later, Yamamoto's attack severed their primary communication link. The response teams suddenly found themselves operating blind, unable to coordinate with their base or call for air support. They continued toward the water station because their training demanded immediate response to any attack. Kowalski's thermal decoys activated simultaneously at 6 different locations, creating phantom human signatures that sent Krillian patrols racing in all directions. Their sophisticated sensors, designed to track conventional military movements, couldn't distinguish between real threats and clever deceptions. "Time to go," Chen whispered, and her teams began their carefully planned withdrawal. They moved in different directions, following routes that had been scouted and prepared over the past 72 hours. Some headed deeper into the jungle, others toward predetermined cache sites, and a few doubled back toward areas the Krillians had already cleared. By the time the alien forces reached their targets, they found only empty jungle and the smoking remains of their own equipment. Their casualties: 0 human killed or captured, 1 water station destroyed, 1 communication relay damaged, and 36 soldiers led on a futile chase through terrain that seemed designed to swallow armies whole. Major Torvak stood in the ruins of his water purification station, his mandibles clicking with frustration. The explosion had been precisely targeted, destroying only the critical components while leaving everything else intact. This wasn't random sabotage. It was surgical strike by someone who understood exactly how the equipment functioned. "Sir," reported his scanner operator, "we're detecting multiple human thermal signatures throughout the jungle, but every time we investigate, we find nothing." "They're playing with us," Torvak realized, his warrior instincts finally recognizing what they were facing. These aren't the primitives we expected. These are trained soldiers. High above the jungle canopy, Admiral Zextar received the first disturbing reports from his ground forces. 3 facilities damaged, multiple wild chase operations, and still no human casualties to show for it. The jungle that had seemed so harmless from orbit was beginning to reveal its true nature. Not as empty wilderness, but as a 3-dimensional battlefield where the humans held every advantage. The easy conquest was becoming something else entirely. The Krillians were learning that humanity's real army had never been the conventional forces they had so easily defeated. It was the ghosts who moved through green shadows, turning the planet's own wilderness into a weapon against the invaders. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the massive cecropia tree, feeling its rough bark through her torn field jacket. The indigenous healer beside her, an elderly Kayapo man named Raoni, gestured silently toward the Krillian patrol approaching through the undergrowth. His weathered face showed no fear, only the calm confidence of someone who had spent 70 years learning every secret of the Amazon. "They walk like tourists," Raoni whispered in accented English, his voice barely audible above the jungle sounds, heavy feet breaking branches following paths. "The forest screams warnings about them." Elena nodded, checking her equipment one final time. The xenobiologist had been working with indigenous communities for 15 years, but the last week had transformed her from a researcher into something else entirely, a translator between 2 worlds that were about to collide in ways the Krillians couldn't imagine. The aliens had superior technology, but they fundamentally misunderstood what they were fighting. They saw the Amazon as empty wilderness populated by primitive humans using Stone Age technology. They couldn't conceive that those primitives possessed knowledge accumulated over thousands of years about warfare in an environment that could kill the unwary in 100 different ways. Raoni disappeared into the green, shadows with movements that seemed to bend the very air around him. Elena had watched him do this dozens of times, but she still couldn't understand how someone could become so perfectly invisible in plain sight. The Krillian sensors detected her human thermal signature clearly, but somehow missed the old man entirely, as if he had learned to mimic the jungle's own rhythms. The Krillian patrol consisted of 8 soldiers in powered armor, moving through the forest with the arrogant confidence of apex predators. Their environmental suits hummed with cooling systems fighting the oppressive humidity, while their sensors painted tactical displays with false confidence about their surroundings. Sergeant Kexium led the patrol, following readings that indicated significant human activity in this sector. His instruments detected thermal signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and chemical traces that suggested a large population center hidden somewhere in the dense forest. The primitive humans were finally showing themselves, probably gathering for some desperate last stand against Krillian superiority. He was tracking 50 phantoms created by Elena's carefully placed decoy devices and Raoni's intimate knowledge of how to manipulate the jungle's natural heat sources. Hot springs, decomposing vegetation, and animal concentration points could be arranged to create false signatures that would fool any computer system designed by a species that evolved on desert worlds. Elena watched the patrol pass her position, counting steps and timing their movements. The Krillians moved in precise formation, maintaining exact intervals and following predetermined patterns. Their military doctrine emphasized discipline and coordination, which made them predictable to opponents who understood their methods. She activated her throat microphone and transmitted a burst signal that would be interpreted by Krillian sensors as jungle wildlife making natural sounds. The message was simple: 8 contacts moving northeast toward waypoint 3. 300 meters away, Master Sergeant Rodriguez received the transmission and smiled grimly. The former Green Beret had spent 2 tours fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting with indigenous allies, he was learning from them, discovering tactics that no military academy had ever taught. Time to introduce our guest to local hospitality, he whispered to the Yanomami warriors, positioned around him. The indigenous fighters moved like flowing water, each taking a different route toward the intercept point. They carried traditional weapons alongside captured Krillian equipment, but their real advantage was something no technology could replicate: perfect understanding of their environment. Young Kopanawa, Raoni's nephew, had been tracking the alien patrol for 2 hours without being detected. The 17-year-old moved through the canopy like his ancestors had for generations, reading signs that no computer could analyze. Broken spiderwebs told him when the aliens had passed. Disturbed bird calls revealed their current direction. The very scent of the air informed him about their emotional state. "They are afraid," he reported through a captured Krillian communicator, "that Elena had modified to work with human vocal patterns. Their breathing is fast and they jump at shadows. The jungle is getting inside their heads." This was exactly what Elena had hoped to achieve. The psychological warfare manual she had studied during her brief military training emphasized that fear was a force multiplier in hostile environments. The Krillians were discovering that their superior technology couldn't protect them from an enemy they couldn't understand or predict. Sergeant Kexum was beginning to feel the jungle's oppressive weight on his consciousness. The powered armor that made him invincible in conventional warfare had become a prison in this environment. His cooling systems were overloading, his sensors provided contradictory readings, and his communication system kept picking up interference that sounded almost like whispered voices. "Sir," reported his scanner operator, "I'm detecting movement on all sides, but thermals show no human signatures." Equipment malfunction, Kexum decided, but his mandibles clicked with nervous energy. "This damned humidity is affecting our systems." He didn't know that Raoni and his team had been treating the metal surfaces of their equipment with natural compounds that confused Krillian thermal imaging. Plants that grew in the deep jungle had evolved sophisticated chemical defenses, and indigenous healers had learned to extract and concentrate those compounds over centuries of experimentation. The attack began with something that no Krillian military computer had ever analyzed: silence. The jungle sounds that had been a constant background noise suddenly stopped. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, no rustling leaves. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kexum's warrior instinct screamed warnings, but his rational mind dismissed the sensation. His species had evolved beyond superstition and primitive fears. The absence of animal sounds meant nothing to a technological civilization that didn't need to listen to nature for survival information. The first casualty wasn't death. It was technology. Elena's modified dart gun fired projectiles coated with sap from the Karari vine, but the payload wasn't traditional poison. She had spent weeks analyzing Krillian equipment, discovering that their power systems were vulnerable to specific organic compounds that could short-circuit their electronics. The dart struck Kexum's environmental system, and his suit immediately began malfunctioning. Warning lights flashed as his air filtration failed, his thermal regulation shut down, and his tactical display filled with error messages. Within seconds, he was breathing humid jungle air that his respiratory system wasn't designed to process. Similar attacks struck the other patrol members from impossible angles. Darts seemed to come from empty air, striking with precision that suggested the shooters could see through their camouflage systems. The Krillians spun in confusion, firing at shadows while their equipment failed around them. Rodriguez and his indigenous allies emerged from concealment like avenging spirits. They didn't fight like conventional soldiers. They fought like the jungle itself, flowing around the aliens' defensive positions and striking from directions that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Kopanawa dropped from the canopy directly onto a Krillian soldier, using traditional climbing techniques to scale the alien's powered armor, while avoiding its weapon systems. His stone-headed war club had been modified with captured alien materials, creating a weapon that could penetrate Krillian defense shields through frequency resonance that their computers couldn't analyze. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes. When it ended, 8 Krillian soldiers lay unconscious in the jungle mud, their equipment disabled and their confidence shattered. They weren't dead. Elena's team needed prisoners for intelligence gathering. But they had been defeated by opponents they couldn't see, using tactics they couldn't understand. "Strip them," Rodriguez ordered, gesturing toward the disabled aliens. "Take everything, weapons, armor, communication devices. Our science teams need to reverse engineer this equipment." But the real victory wasn't captured technology. It was the psychological impact spreading through the Krillian forces as patrol after patrol disappeared into the green shadows, their final transmissions filled with confusion and growing fear. In his command center, Major Torvac stared at tactical displays that made no sense. His forces controlled all the major terrain features, held all the strategic positions, and possessed overwhelming technological superiority. Yet somehow they were losing ground to an enemy that refused to fight conventional battles. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, "we've lost contact with 6 patrols in the past 12 hours. No distress signals, no battle damage assessments, just silence." Torvac's mandibles clicked with frustrated rage. The jungle was swallowing his soldiers like some vast predator, leaving no trace of their fate. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, but none had ever fought back like this. The very environment seemed to be allied with the human defenders. High above the canopy, Admiral Zextar reviewed reports from jungle operations with growing unease. Commander Vextar descended through the jungle canopy in his personal combat suit, determined to end the embarrassing resistance that was making his ground forces look incompetent. The powered exoskeleton was a masterpiece of Krillian engineering, equipped with active camouflage, advanced targeting systems, and enough firepower to level a city block. He would personally hunt down these primitive insurgents and demonstrate proper Krillian superiority. "Sir," came the voice of his tactical coordinator through the comm system, "recommend you maintain altitude and coordinate from air support. Ground conditions are proving challenging." Vextar's mandibles clicked with irritation. "I've led successful campaigns across 3 star systems. I won't be defeated by a few primitives hiding in their natural habitat." What he didn't understand was that he had just descended into the territory of Maria Santos, and she had been waiting for him. Santos crouched motionless in the strangler fig that had wrapped itself around a giant kapok tree, creating a natural fortress 40 meters above the jungle floor. The former Brazilian Special Forces operator had spent 3 days observing Krillian air movements, learning their patrol patterns, and identifying their command structure. The alien leader's personal combat suit was more advanced than anything she had encountered, but it also made him easy to track. "Ghost actual to all stations," she whispered into her throat mic. "Priority target incoming. Vector 270, altitude decreasing. Execute Predator protocol." Around her, concealed throughout a square kilometer of jungle, 16 of Earth's most lethal operators prepared to demonstrate why apex predators should never assume they're at the top of the food chain in someone else's territory. Sergeant First Class Johnson had been perfectly still for 6 hours, covered in mud and vegetation that made him invisible to both visual and thermal detection. The former Delta Force sniper had learned patience in the mountains of Afghanistan, but the Amazon demanded a different kind of endurance. Here, stillness meant accepting that you shared your space with creatures that could kill you if you moved wrong. A fer de lance coiled lazily around his left arm, its deadly fangs inches from his neck. Johnson breathed slowly and evenly, his heartbeat controlled, his body temperature lowered through meditation techniques that few soldiers ever mastered. The snake sensed no threat and remained calm, becoming part of his camouflage. Through his scope, he watched Vextar's combat suit navigate through the trees with impressive agility. The alien technology allowed for 3-dimensional movement that human equipment couldn't match. But it also created vibrations and electromagnetic signatures that could be tracked by opponents who understood the jungle's natural rhythms. "Tango in sight," Johnson reported. "Clean shot, 200 meters. "Negative," Santos replied. "Hold position. We want him alive and angry." This wasn't about killing the enemy commander. It was about teaching the Krillians that their technological superiority meant nothing in an environment where the rules of warfare had been written by evolution, rather than military engineers. Vextar's sensors detected multiple heat signatures in the surrounding jungle, but the readings were confusing. The thermal patterns seemed to shift and flow like living smoke, never remaining in one position long enough for his targeting systems to lock on. His artificial intelligence kept classifying the contacts as animal life rather than hostile forces. Computer analysis indicates local wildlife. His suit's AI reported enclipped Krillian. No immediate threats detected. The AI was technically correct. Santos and her team had learned to mimic the thermal signatures of indigenous animals so perfectly that even sophisticated alien computers couldn't distinguish between human operators and jungle fauna. They moved with the same rhythm as sloths, maintained body temperatures similar to large birds, and positioned themselves in locations where animals would naturally gather. The attack began with Corporal Liu dropping from a 100-foot emergent tree directly onto Vextar's position. The former Chinese Special Forces operator had spent 2 days climbing to his perch using traditional mountaineering techniques that left no technological signature. His descent was calculated to arrive exactly when the alien commander would be most vulnerable. Liu struck the combat suit with a modified grappling hook that Elena's science team had designed specifically for Krillian armor. The device didn't try to penetrate the alien's defenses. Instead, it created electromagnetic interference that confused the suit's balance systems and made Vextar crash into the jungle floor. "Contact," Vextar snarled, activating his suit's weapon systems as he fought to regain control. His plasma cannon swiveled toward Liu's position, but the human had already vanished into the green maze of understory vegetation. The jungle erupted into chaos as Santos's team executed their carefully rehearsed plan. They didn't attack the alien commander directly. Instead, they turned his own advanced systems against him. Mirrors positioned throughout the canopy reflected his laser targeting beams back at his sensors, creating false contact readings. Captured Krillian communication devices broadcast conflicting orders that overloaded his tactical network. Captain Morrison emerged from the river system that threaded through the jungle floor, his approach masked by the same underwater infiltration techniques that had been perfected by human special forces over decades of warfare. The Navy SEAL's modified spear gun fired restraining cables that wrapped around Vextar's weapon systems, temporarily disabling his ability to return fire. "Multiple hostiles," Vextar reported to his orbital command, his voice tight with combat stress. "Sophisticated tactics. They're using our own technology against us." But even as he spoke, he realized that wasn't quite accurate. The humans weren't just using Krillian technology. They were using the jungle itself as a weapon. Every tree, every vine, every shadow had been turned into part of an integrated defense system that his computers couldn't analyze or predict. Staff Sergeant Williams surfaced from a hidden pool directly beneath Vextar's position, using reeds for breathing just as his human ancestors had done thousands of years ago. His role was simple but crucial: attach Elena's latest invention to the alien's power supply. The device looked like nothing more than a cluster of jungle fungus, but it contained spores that had been genetically modified to interfere with Krillian energy systems. When activated, it would slowly drain the combat suit's power while appearing to be natural biological growth that any computer would dismiss as environmental contamination. Vextar spun frantically, trying to track enemies who seemed to teleport through the jungle around him. His advanced sensors detected movement everywhere but could never lock onto specific targets. Every time he fired at a confirmed contact, his weapons struck empty air while new threats appeared from impossible angles. "Sir," came an urgent transmission from his orbital support team. "Your power levels are decreasing rapidly. Recommend immediate extraction." "Negative," Vextar snarled, his warrior pride refusing to accept defeat by primitives. "I can handle a few insurgents with Stone Age weapons." That was when Santos made her personal appearance. She dropped from the canopy like a hunting cat, landing directly on Vextar's back and using indigenous climbing techniques to scale his armored suit. Her weapons were simple: traditional blowgun loaded with darts tipped in curare, and a ceramic knife that wouldn't register on alien metal detectors. "Surprise," she whispered in Portuguese, then switched to English as she drove the knife toward the combat suit's air filtration system. "Welcome to our jungle." Vextar reached back desperately, trying to dislodge the human clinging to his armor like some primitive parasite. But Santos moved with liquid grace, flowing around his defensive systems while systematically disabling critical components. She had studied captured Krillian equipment for weeks, learning exactly where each suit was most vulnerable. The dart struck home, delivering not poison, but a concentrated dose of psychoactive compounds extracted from local plants. Elena's biochemical warfare program had discovered that certain jungle toxins could interfere with Krillian neural systems, creating confusion and disorientation without permanent damage. Vextar's vision began to blur as unfamiliar chemicals flooded his bloodstream. The jungle around him seemed to come alive, with trees moving like giant predators and shadows reaching out with grasping tendrils. His rational mind knew this was chemical-induced hallucination, but his senses couldn't distinguish between real threats and phantom enemies. "Help me," he gasped into his communicator, his voice betraying the fear that no Krillian warrior ever wanted to admit. "I'm under attack by, I don't know what they are." Santos and her team melted back into the jungle as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Vextar alone with his failing equipment and growing paranoia. They had achieved their objective without firing a single conventional weapon, or using any technology more advanced than Stone Age hunting tools enhanced with captured alien materials. 20 minutes later, a Krillian rescue team found their commander unconscious on the jungle floor, his advanced combat suit completely disabled and his confidence shattered. The medical team detected no serious injuries, but Vextar's after-action report made no tactical sense. He claimed to have been attacked by ghosts who could walk through trees and disappear into thin air. Into thin air. Hallucination, the medical officer diagnosed. Exposure to unknown jungle toxins affecting brain chemistry. But Major Torvak wasn't so sure. He had been receiving similar reports from other commanders who had ventured into the deep jungle. Experienced warriors were returning with stories of impossible encounters and equipment failures that no engineer could explain. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Admiral Zextar is requesting updated casualty assessments and revised timeline for pacification operations." Torvak stared at the tactical display, showing Krillian forces clustered around a few heavily fortified positions while vast stretches of jungle remained under human control. The easy conquest had become a nightmare of asymmetric warfare against opponents who refused to fight by civilized rules. "Tell the Admiral," he said slowly, "that we may need to revise our operational assumptions about this planet's defensive capabilities." High in orbit, Admiral Zextar was coming to the same conclusion. His ground forces were being systematically humiliated by opponents who shouldn't have been able to challenge a single Krillian soldier, let alone entire units equipped with the finest military technology the Empire could provide. The humans were teaching them that in the jungle, evolution had already selected the ultimate weapons, and humanity had learned to use every one of them. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the largest gathering of indigenous leaders the Amazon had seen in living memory. Representatives from dozens of tribes had traveled through hundreds of miles of jungle to attend this unprecedented council. Kayapa warriors sat beside Yanomami shamans, while Tikuna elders shared knowledge with young Awa hunters. The diversity was staggering, but they all shared one common purpose: defending their home against alien invaders. "The metal people think they understand war," said Rowney, his weathered face serious in the flickering light of the ceremonial fire. "But they fight like children with loud noises and bright lights. They do not understand that the forest itself can be a weapon." Elena translated his words for the encrypted radio link to human military commands around the globe. The information flowing from this meeting would reshape humanity's entire defensive strategy. But she knew the real value lay in what these people could teach about survival in environments that conventional military thinking had written off as impassable. Chief Marcos of the Munduruku nodded sagely. "My grandfather fought the rubber tappers who tried to destroy our forests. He learned that the best defense is to make the jungle itself fight for you. The metal people are like the rubber tappers. They see only resources to steal, not a living system to respect." What Elena was witnessing was the birth of a new kind of warfare. The indigenous communities weren't just offering to fight alongside human special forces. They were providing a completely different understanding of how to turn an ecosystem into an ally. Their knowledge had been passed down through generations of people who had survived in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Young Kopanawa raised his hand respectfully. "The metal people's machines stop working when we feed them the right plants. My grandmother showed me which leaves make their metal sick." This was perhaps the most crucial intelligence of all. The indigenous communities had been experimenting with captured Krillian equipment for weeks, applying traditional knowledge of plant chemistry to advanced alien technology. What they had discovered was that many Krillian systems were vulnerable to organic compounds that wouldn't even register as threats on their security scanners. "Demonstrate," Elena requested, activating her recording equipment. Kopanawa produced a small vial of dark liquid extracted from a combination of plants that grew deep in the jungle interior. When he applied a single drop to a captured Krillian communicator, the device immediately began smoking and sparking before shutting down completely. "This plant blood confuses their thinking machines," he explained. "We have found 17 different plant mixtures that make their weapons stop working. But the best ones require ceremonies to prepare properly." Elena realized she was documenting something unprecedented in military history. These weren't conventional chemical weapons. They were biochemical warfare techniques developed by people who understood the jungle's chemistry at a molecular level. The shamans and healers weren't just traditional leaders. They were organic chemists with thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. 300 kilometers away, Colonel Sandra Harrison received Elena's latest intelligence report with growing amazement. The Australian SAS officer had spent her career fighting in deserts and mountains, but the Amazon was proving to be a completely different kind of battlefield. "Aboriginal trackers," she muttered to herself, remembering her own people's traditional knowledge. "Why didn't we think of this sooner?" She activated her secure communication link to indigenous communities across Australia. If the Amazon tribes could turn their ecosystem into a weapon, perhaps the Aboriginal peoples could do the same in the outback. The Krillians had established major bases in Central Australia, assuming the desert would be easier to control than the jungle. They were about to learn that different environments required different survival skills, and humanity had experts in everyone. In the Amazon, Rowney was explaining the most sophisticated biological warfare concepts Elena had ever encountered. "The forest has memory," he said, gesturing toward the vast canopy overhead. "When one tree is attacked, it warns all the others through roots and air. We can make the metal people's arrival trigger the forest's own defenses." What he was describing was essentially turning the jungle's natural chemical communication systems into an early warning network. Trees under stress released specific pheromones that could be detected by other plants, triggering defensive responses across huge areas. The indigenous communities had learned to read these signals and even manipulate them. "When their flying machines land," continued Rowney, "we can make the trees release substances that damage their metal skin. The forest will fight for us if we ask properly." Elena's scientific training struggled to process what she was hearing. These people were describing techniques that bordered on science fiction, using biological systems for technological warfare in ways that no laboratory had ever imagined. Yet they spoke about it as casually as discussing the weather. The demonstration that followed changed her understanding of what was possible, Chief. Anna of the Tikuna women led Elena to a section of jungle where Krillian forces had established a supply depot. 3 days earlier, the aliens had cleared a landing zone and installed prefabricated structures using their standard rapid deployment procedures. From their perspective, it was a perfectly functional forward operating base. From the indigenous perspective, it was an infection that the forest was preparing to reject. "Watch," Anna whispered, and began singing in her native language. Elena initially thought this was some kind of spiritual ceremony, but as she listened more carefully, she realized the song contained specific information about plant locations, wind patterns, and chemical concentrations. Anna was essentially programming a biological computer system using musical notation that had been developed over centuries. The response began slowly. Vines that had been cut back during the base construction started growing with impossible speed, reaching toward the alien structures with obvious purposefulness. The local insect population shifted patterns, concentrating around Krillian equipment in ways that would overwhelm their air filtration systems. But the most remarkable change was in the air itself. Elena's instruments detected rising concentrations of organic compounds that she recognized from her study of captured alien technology. The jungle was literally changing its atmospheric chemistry to create conditions that would damage Krillian equipment. "How is this possible?" Elena asked, her scientific skepticism warring with undeniable evidence. "The forest has been preparing for this war for thousands of years," Anna replied calmly. Not against metal people specifically, but against anything that tries to destroy the balance. We just showed it what the new threat looks like. Back at the Krillian supply depot, automated systems were beginning to detect anomalous readings. Environmental sensors showed chemical concentrations that didn't match any known atmospheric compositions. Equipment that had been functioning perfectly was developing mysterious malfunctions. Supply Officer Nick Sara reviewed the data with growing confusion. "Sir, something is wrong with the local environment. Our metal alloys are showing signs of accelerated corrosion, and our air filtration systems are operating at maximum capacity to handle unknown organic compounds." Major Torvak studied the reports with a sinking feeling. "Estimated timeline for equipment failure? If these trends continue, we'll need to evacuate this position within 48 hours. Similar reports were flooding in from Krillian bases across the Amazon. The jungle itself seemed to be mounting a coordinated attack against their presence, using weapons that no military computer could classify or counter. Equipment designed to function in virtually any environment was failing when exposed to what appeared to be naturally occurring phenomena. "It's impossible," Torvak muttered, but the evidence was undeniable. Somehow the humans had found a way to weaponize the planet's own ecosystem against the invasion force. In the depths of the jungle, Elena was learning that the indigenous communities had been preparing for this kind of warfare without realizing it. Their traditional ecological knowledge had always included techniques for manipulating natural systems to defend their territories. They had fought off conquistadors, rubber tappers, and mining companies using these same methods. "The metal people think technology means machines," explained Rowney with a slight smile. "But the most advanced technology on this planet is life itself. We just learned how to ask it for help." Elena transmitted her findings to military commanders worldwide, knowing that this intelligence would revolutionize how humanity fought the alien invasion. The Krillians had superior machines, but humans had something that no interstellar empire could replicate: intimate knowledge of how Earth's living systems functioned. The indigenous peoples weren't just allies in this war. They were the ultimate special forces, trained by evolution itself to defend their planet using weapons that the aliens couldn't even recognize as threats. For the first time since the invasion began, Elena felt genuinely optimistic about humanity's chances. The Krillians had made their greatest mistake by assuming that Earth was just another planet to be conquered. They had never encountered a world where the defenders could turn the entire biosphere into an ally. They were about to learn that on Earth, the environment itself would fight for its children. Admiral Zextar stared at the tactical hologram in his command center, watching red failure markers spread across the global battle map like a digital plague. Krillian forces that had dominated the initial invasion were now abandoning positions across 3 continents, retreating from what their reports described as environmental anomalies that made no military sense. "Explain to me," he said slowly, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled fury, "how an inferior species is defeating our forces using plant matter and animal behavior." Intelligence Officer Nick Sara consulted her data tablets with obvious discomfort. "Sir, the humans appear to have developed biological warfare techniques that our computers cannot classify. They're using the planet's own ecosystem as a weapon system." "Impossible," Zextar declared. "No civilization has ever weaponized an entire planetary biosphere. It violates every principle of military engineering." But the evidence was overwhelming. The humans weren't just fighting with conventional special forces tactics. They had somehow turned Earth itself into a combatant. Krillian equipment designed to function in hostile environments was failing when exposed to what appeared to be naturally occurring phenomena that didn't exist on any other world the Empire had conquered. 3,000 kilometers below, Captain Sarah Chen crouched in the canopy of a giant kapok tree, watching the evacuation of another Krillian forward base through her binoculars. The aliens were loading their equipment onto transport vehicles with obvious haste, their environmental suits struggling against atmospheric conditions that seemed designed specifically to defeat their technology. "Ghost lead to command," she transmitted using her encrypted burst communicator. "Tango Base 7 is abandoning position. Repeat, hostiles are withdrawing without engaging our forces." The response came from General Morrison, coordinating human resistance from a mobile command post hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Confirmed, Ghost Lead. Similar reports from 17 other positions worldwide. Whatever your indigenous allies are doing, it's working. Chen smiled grimly as she watched the last Krillian transport disappear into the sky. The aliens were learning that superior technology meant nothing when the environment itself rejected your presence. The indigenous communities had shown humanity how to fight a war using weapons that predated civilization by millions of years. Around her, the jungle pulsed with coordinated activity that would have been invisible to alien sensors. Rowney and his extended family network were implementing what they called the Great Awakening, a continent-wide activation of the forest's natural defense, systems that had never been attempted on such a scale. The metal people are running, observed young Kopanawa, dropping from branch to branch with casual grace. But they will return with bigger weapons. We must make the forest remember how to fight sky enemies. This was the most ambitious phase of the indigenous warfare program. The communities weren't content to simply repel local intrusions. They were preparing to defend against orbital bombardment using techniques that combined traditional ecological knowledge with captured alien technology. Elena emerged from her portable laboratory, her hair disheveled and her field clothes stained with chemical compounds that didn't exist in any textbook. The xenobiologist had spent 3 weeks working with shamans and healers to reverse engineer Krillian biotechnology, discovering principles that would revolutionize human understanding of biochemical warfare. The atmospheric modification program is ready for implementation, she announced, holding up a collection of sealed vials that contained what looked like ordinary plant extracts. If this works, we can create localized atmospheric conditions that will make it impossible for Krillian forces to operate anywhere on the planet. The science behind it was elegantly simple. Earth's plants had evolved sophisticated chemical defense systems over hundreds of millions of years, developing compounds that could deter virtually any biological threat. The indigenous communities had learned to extract and concentrate these substances, creating atmospheric cocktails that could overwhelm alien environmental systems. But the real breakthrough was understanding how to coordinate these defenses across continental scales. The trees talk to each other, explained Chief Anna, gesturing toward the vast forest canopy. Through roots, through air, through water. When one tree learns something, all trees can learn it. We just taught them what alien metal smells like. Elena's instruments confirmed what sounded like fantasy. The jungle was actually modifying its chemical output in response to the presence of Krillian technology, creating atmospheric conditions that corroded alien equipment while remaining harmless to indigenous life forms. High above the Amazon, a Krillian reconnaissance drone detected unusual atmospheric readings that triggered automatic safety protocols. The unmanned vehicle's AI calculated chemical concentrations that exceeded safe operational parameters and immediately began climbing toward cleaner air. But the chemical changes were expanding upward as well, following air currents and wind patterns in ways that suggested coordination rather than random diffusion. The drone's sensors recorded readings that violated everything the Krillians understood about planetary atmospheric chemistry. Impossible, muttered the drone operator aboard the orbital command ship. These readings suggest the entire planetary atmosphere is changing composition in real time. He was witnessing something that no alien species had ever encountered. A planet whose biosphere could adapt to new threats faster than conventional military technology could respond. Earth's living systems were essentially treating the Krillian presence as a massive infection and mobilizing immune responses on a global scale. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal elder Tommy Williams stood on a red sandstone ridge, watching dust devils dance across the desert floor with patterns that seemed almost purposeful. The Krillian base in the valley below was suffering equipment failures that their engineers couldn't explain. Country's fighting back, he told the SAS operators positioned around him. Always does when strangers don't show proper respect. The Aboriginal communities had their own version of Elena's atmospheric warfare program. Desert plants produced different defensive compounds than jungle vegetation, but the principles remained the same. The land itself could be awakened to recognize and reject intruders who didn't understand how to live in harmony with natural systems. Sergeant Murphy, a longtime veteran of desert warfare, watched in amazement as the Krillian vehicles began showing signs of mechanical breakdown. Sand was infiltrating their systems in patterns that seemed to violate basic physics, while their cooling systems struggled against heat conditions that their computers insisted were within normal parameters. "It's like the bloody desert. Wants them gone," he muttered. "That's exactly what it is," Williams replied calmly. "We just reminded the land how to protect itself." Similar scenes were playing out across the globe. In the Siberian forests, indigenous hunters were teaching pine trees to recognize the electromagnetic signatures of Krillian equipment. In the Amazon basin, river systems were changing their chemical composition to corrode alien metal alloys. On Pacific Islands, coral reefs were generating toxic compounds that made amphibious landings impossible. Admiral Zextar received the global status reports with growing disbelief. Krillian forces were being systematically repelled from every terrestrial environment they attempted to occupy, not by superior human technology, but by the planet itself. "Sir," reported his chief science officer, "our atmospheric analysis teams believe the humans have developed some form of planetary-scale biotechnology that can alter environmental conditions faster than our equipment can adapt." "Impossible," Zextar repeated, but the word was beginning to lose meaning. Everything about this conquest was proving impossible according to Krillian understanding of how warfare functioned. "Recommend immediate escalation to orbital bombardment," his tactical officer suggested. "If we cannot occupy the surface, we can sterilize it and extract resources from dead terrain." But that approach carried its own risks. The Krillian Empire conquered planets to exploit their resources, not to destroy them. A sterilized Earth would be worthless for colonization or resource extraction. Negative, Zextar decided. "We need this planet's biological resources intact. Find me another solution." Down in the jungle, Elena was preparing for exactly this possibility. The indigenous communities had always known that the final phase of defense would require the most dangerous gambit of all, turning Earth's atmosphere itself into a weapon that could reach into space. "The sky spirits are angry," Rowney announced, studying cloud formations that seemed to be gathering with unnatural purpose. "They will help us fight the metal people's flying houses." Elena's scientific instruments detected what Rayoni's traditional knowledge recognized intuitively. The atmospheric modifications were creating weather patterns that hadn't existed on Earth for millions of years. Storm systems were forming with electromagnetic properties that could interfere with orbital operations. The planet itself was preparing to defend against threats from space, using weapons that had been dormant since the age of the dinosaurs. Humanity had awakened something that the Krillians could never have anticipated. The storm that began forming over the Amazon basin defied every law of atmospheric physics that Krillian science understood. Admiral Zextar watched from his flagship's observation deck as electrical discharges painted impossible patterns across Earth's sky, while his meteorological computers insisted that such weather formations couldn't exist on any known planet. "Sir," reported his science officer, her voice tight with disbelief, "the electromagnetic emissions from that storm system are interfering with our orbital communications. The patterns appear to be intentional." Zextar's four eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. The storm wasn't just anomalous. It was actively targeting Krillian technology with precision that suggested intelligence behind the phenomenon. "Storms don't think," he growled, but even as he spoke, he could see evidence that challenged that fundamental assumption. 3 kilometers below the cloud base, Elena Vasquez stood in the eye of humanity's most ambitious experiment. The indigenous communities had gathered from across 3 continents, their combined knowledge creating something that no single tribe had ever attempted. They were asking the planet itself to defend against threats from space. "The sky spirits are listening," whispered Chief Anna, her weathered hands raised toward the swirling clouds above. "They remember when the great rock fell from the stars and made winter for many seasons. They will not let it happen again." Elena's instruments registered electromagnetic frequencies that shouldn't have been possible in a natural storm system. The atmospheric disturbance was generating focused energy beams that could penetrate the upper atmosphere and interfere with spacecraft operations. It was as if the Earth had remembered how to defend itself against cosmic threats. Around the ceremonial clearing, representatives from dozens of indigenous communities chanted in languages that predated recorded history. But this wasn't superstition. It was the application of traditional ecological knowledge on a scale that modern science had never imagined possible. They were coordinating the planet's own defense systems using techniques that had been passed down through thousands of generations. Aboard the Krillian flagship, damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. The storm system was generating electromagnetic pulses that overloaded alien shielding systems, while somehow avoiding interference with Earth's own natural electromagnetic field. It was impossible yet undeniably happening. "Sir," the tactical officer announced, "we're losing orbital positioning on 3 ships. The electromagnetic interference is affecting our navigation systems." Zextar's mandibles clicked with frustrated rage. His fleet had conquered star systems defended by advanced civilizations, but they were being defeated by a weather pattern that appeared to be targeting them, specifically. "Impossible," he muttered for what felt like the 1,000th time since arriving at Earth. Weather systems don't exhibit tactical intelligence, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The storm was coordinating with human resistance activities, providing electromagnetic cover for special forces operations, while simultaneously disrupting Krillian communications. It was as if the planet's atmosphere had joined the resistance movement. Deep in the Amazon, Captain Sarah Chen led her combined force of special operations personnel and indigenous warriors toward the primary Krillian command center. The alien base was shielded by advanced defensive systems that should have made it impregnable, but the storm was providing opportunities that no conventional military operation could have created. "Ghost lead to all stations," she transmitted, knowing that the electromagnetic chaos overhead would mask their communications from alien interception. "Weather window is optimal. Execute Stormrider protocol." The attack that followed would be remembered as the moment when humanity proved that superior technology was meaningless against opponents who understood how to make an entire planet their. Ali Kopanawa dropped from the storm clouds themselves, using traditional paragliding techniques adapted for the impossible wind currents that the indigenous weather workers had created. The young Yanomami warrior descended through electromagnetic chaos that would have fried any electronic guidance system, navigating by instincts that his ancestors had used to read wind patterns for thousands of years. His landing was perfect, silent and completely invisible to Krillian sensors that were overwhelmed by the storm's interference. He struck the base's primary shield generator with explosive charges, designed by Elena's science team, devices that used traditional plant-based chemistry to create focused electromagnetic pulses. Similar attacks struck simultaneously around the perimeter as other indigenous warriors materialized from impossible directions. They moved through the storm like they had been born in it, using wind currents and electromagnetic fields as naturally as walking paths through familiar forest. Major Torvak watched his defenses crumble with the helpless rage of a professional soldier being defeated by tactics that violated everything he understood about warfare. His sensors detected attackers who seemed to appear from thin air, while his communication systems failed to coordinate any effective response. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the electromagnetic interference is preventing target lock on hostiles. Our automated defenses can't distinguish between enemy contacts and atmospheric disturbance." Through the chaos, Torvak saw human figures moving with impossible grace through his supposedly impregnable base. They weren't using advanced technology. They were using the storm itself as camouflage, transportation, and weapon delivery system. "Orbital support," he called desperately. "Request immediate bombardment of our position." But Admiral Zextar's response carried the weight of absolute defeat. "Negative. Storm interference prevents accurate targeting. We cannot risk hitting our own forces." The Krillian Empire, masters of 3-star systems, had been outmaneuvered by opponents who could turn weather into military strategy. Elena coordinated the final phase of the operation from her position in the storm's eye, where the indigenous weather workers maintained perfect calm, while chaos raged around them. Her modified communication system, enhanced with traditional techniques for long-distance jungle communication, connected resistance cells across the globe. "Phoenix rising to all stations," she transmitted. "Global synchronization achieved. Execute planetary rejection protocol." Across Earth, similar storms erupted simultaneously. The Aboriginal communities in Australia called dust devils that could strip alien electronics. Pacific Islander navigators summoned typhoons that drove Krillian naval forces from the oceans. Arctic peoples awakened aurora displays that interfered with spacecraft operations across polar regions. The planet itself had joined the resistance, using atmospheric weapons that had been dormant since the last mass extinction event. Earth was demonstrating that it could defend itself against cosmic threats using systems that predated complex life by billions of years. On his flagship, Admiral Zextar watched his invasion force being systematically expelled from Earth's surface by phenomena that challenged everything the Krillian Empire understood about planetary conquest. His ships were being driven from orbit by storms that seemed to target alien technology, specifically while leaving human activities untouched. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human governments. They're offering to negotiate our withdrawal from the system." Zextar's pride rebelled against the very concept of negotiating with primitives, but his professional assessment of the tactical situation left no room for self-deception. His forces had been comprehensively defeated by opponents who had turned an entire planet into their ally. "Terms?" he asked, the word tasting like acid in his mouth. The human terms were surprisingly generous. "Complete Krillian withdrawal from the solar system, with guarantees of safe passage for the fleet. In exchange, Earth would share limited agricultural and medical knowledge that might benefit other worlds in the Empire." But the message carried an unmistakable warning. Any future aggression against Earth would trigger planetary defense systems that could reach across interstellar distances. The humans claimed that they could teach other worlds to defend themselves using the same techniques that had defeated the Krillian invasion. "Impossible," Zextar muttered one final time, but he knew he had no choice but to accept the terms. 3 days later, the last Krillian transport departed Earth's atmosphere, carrying the remnants of what had been expected to be the Empire's easiest conquest. Behind them, they left a planet that had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Elena stood with Rayoni on the riverbank, where their collaboration had begun, watching the alien ships disappear into the star-filled sky. The old shaman smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had lived to see his people's ancient knowledge prove its worth against the greatest challenge they had ever faced. "The metal people will remember," he said calmly. "They will tell other star tribes that this world fights for its children. They will not return." Elena nodded, understanding that they had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. Earth had become the first planet to successfully repel an advanced alien invasion using biological and atmospheric weapons that no spacefaring civilization had ever encountered. But perhaps more importantly, humanity had learned that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military forces. It was their connection to the living world that had shaped them, and their willingness to listen to the wisdom of those who understood how to live in harmony with forces greater than themselves. The Krillian Empire would carry word across the galaxy that Earth was defended by powers beyond conventional military comprehension. Other worlds would hear the story and begin to remember their own traditional knowledge, their own connections to the living systems that had created them. The age of easy conquest was ending. In its place, a new era was beginning, one where planets themselves could choose their own destiny, guided by the wisdom of those who had never forgotten how to speak with the voices of wind and water, earth and sky. The galaxy would never be the same, and it all began in a jungle where ancient knowledge met impossible challenges and proved that sometimes the oldest weapons were still the most powerful.